Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining me. My name is Douglas Grummins, and today I want to bring you something I wrote years ago. It was actually my first book. In 2012, I wrote 10,000 Waves. It's a story of my surfing life. I had another whole life before I became a surfer, but once I became a surfer, everything changed. It changed for me in many ways. So I'd like to share that with you and take you on a journey. But it's more than just surfing. So be aware and listen carefully, because the truths that I share in this book are very deep and valuable, meaningful things that I hope everyone at some point in their life gets to share. So please remember also that I had never written anything in my life really before I wrote this book. So it could be redone. It could be done a little bit neater, that's for sure. But this is its raw essence. This is me unedited. Anyway, here we are with the preface. I start off by saying, I do not remember where I first saw someone riding a skateboard. What I do remember is a breaking apart a metal wheeled roller skate and then nailing the two broken pieces to a short piece of a 2x6. Even though I grew up away from the ocean, I felt like I spent my whole childhood preparing for the days ahead. Growing up, I found my highs riding skateboard halfpipes in parks, not knowing that one day I would look back and call myself a surfer. Surfing is my first love, the one thing I am the most passionate about. If there are waves, I am usually out there in the water, no matter how small or how big. I have made many sacrifices, like missing family events or spending long days driving to and from many a beach. The wind directs me which way to go. If she blows to the right direction and brings me waves, I must follow. If she blows cold air in from another direction, I seek higher ground. So if she blows so lightly that not even a ripple is found, then I seek even higher ground. So this is a surfer's story, and the fruits that came along with riding the waves. I would love to say thank you to all the wonderful souls who have blessed my life. I wish I could have mentioned every single person who helped me mold me along the way. With hindsight, I realized that this list would have to include every single person I have known. For over 14 years, I have lived with a secret. I had never had a motivation to tell this secret to my family or to my friends, but sometimes life throws a curveball at you. Thanks to somebody very dear to me, I realized that I had a voice, and not only had a voice, but a song to sing as well. And this is my song. Chapter 1, The First Wave. In the early 80s, my best friend and I took a vacation to Corpus Christi. We rented 2 surfboards. We grew up skateboarding, so we figured this would be fun. Each board was about 8 foot long and bright and yellow, and we paddled out into knee to waist high waves. We didn't have a clue what to do. We spent hours trying to catch a wave, falling off time after time. Finally, hours of failed attempts, we both stood up and rode a wave for the first time. We looked at each other with huge grins on our faces, and we said, "We did it! We finally rode a wave." But there's a difference between riding a wave and surfing a wave. So we continued surfing that day for a while, but we never stood up again. I think surfing is a lot harder than it looks. Even though that was my first wave, it didn't ignite a fire that would consume my entire life. This didn't happen until almost 6 years later. The wave that changed my life happened one day after I moved to the East Coast. My girlfriend lived in Virginia Beach, Virginia. For those that don't know, Virginia Beach is a magical place. That's where Edgar Cayce once said, "The sand has magical healing qualities." We were visiting the beach on the north end, not far from where the Edgar Cayce Center is, and my girlfriend's family lived a couple of blocks away from the beach. We would gather up the chairs and umbrellas and anything that would float and load it up into a makeshift bicycle cart that her father had made. The north end of Virginia Beach is very upscale, so we always received disapproving stares from neighbors as we rode this makeshift cart past the $1-million homes. I was helping my girlfriend's father load some suitcases into the attic above his garage when I noticed a small old surfboard stuffed away in the back. I reached back and pulled it down from the attic. The board was red and rather thick, and it had a wolf logo on it, and it had one fin in it. It was only about 5 foot long, and I said, "Hey, let's take this with us to the beach." I still, to this day, feel that that was a magical day. We unloaded the cart and played in the waves. After about 30 minutes of playing in the shore break, I noticed that the waves on the uh, sandbar were breaking at about 3 foot. I pulled out the old wolf board, which had no wax on it, but I had no intention of trying to stand up. The board was too short. It was a miracle it even floated me. I just wanted to play in the wave and play in the surf. I paddled out to where the waves were breaking, and I saw a wave headed straight for me. I turned towards the shore and paddled as fast as I could. The wave took hold of me and shot me out into the clean part. I popped up and landed on my feet and rode the wave all the way across the sandbar. I still don't know how I stayed on the board. It was slick, and the way I pumped the board was like riding a skateboard bowl. This was the only thing I can relate it to. The saying goes, only a surfer knows the feeling. And after being on this planet for over 20 years, I felt that I knew what it meant. It's like kissing God's face. And from that moment on, all I dreamt of was the feeling the wave gave me. Would I be able to feel it again? And when would the waves be up again? Those are the questions I always ask everybody and myself. Something awoke within me. Little did I know that my life from that moment on would be changed. Not only changed, but formed, molded, strengthened, and enlightened. Yes, Virginia Beach is a magical place with a lively surf culture. The waves are generally small scale, but very rippable. The most famous and favorite spot is called First Street. And no matter what the size of the waves, you could always find a crew of guys out touching God's face. Following that first day on the wolf board, I bought wax. I bought books, subscribed to Surfer Magazine, and begged my girlfriend to go to the beach every weekend we could. At the time, we lived 3 hours from the beach, and we didn't have a lot of money. City life can be very expensive. I worked full-time and helped pay bills by working side jobs. I couldn't afford to buy a surfboard, but a friend of mine who also lived in the city gave me his board. I didn't know if he realized it, but he was the person most responsible for creating a surfer. My friend John gave me the gift of surfing. The board he gave me was a classic Lightning Bolt single fin 1970s board. John came with me to the beach a couple months after he'd given me the board, and we surfed together all afternoon. And when we finished, John told me that I was a natural. He said that I was fluid, and it was obvious that surfing was in my heart. John also introduced me to snowboarding. He told me that snowboarding was like riding a really big wave for several minutes, and this I had to see for myself. In those days, wetsuits were not very good, and the water temperature in Virginia Beach fell into the 40s around mid-February. Paddling out during the cold months was a challenge. The first duck dive would give you an ice cream headache. The second duck dive was so painful it would make your eyes water. And by the time I duck dived my third wave, all I wanted to do was to turn around and head to shore. Sometimes we did, but most of the time we just toughed it out and prayed that there wasn't a fourth wave in the set. But if there was a fourth wave, sometimes we would just try to get up over the top of it and not duck dive at all. The idea of snowboarding in the winter months sounded like a great alternative. The first time we ever went snowboarding turned out to be one of the best weekends of my life. We were still living in Northern Virginia, and the closest resort was Massanutten. Massanutten is a pretty small resort, but still it is a great place to start mountain surfing. Snowboarding was only a couple of years old at the time, and everyone seemed to be into it or wanted to get into it. When we arrived at the mountain, we walked up to the rental department and asked for a snowboard, and the attendant said that they were all rented out. I said, shit, I was so bummed out. My first time to the mountain and all sold out. The attendant said that one might become available in the afternoon, and we ended up renting skis. The best I could do on the skis was the blue intermediate slopes. Even then, I would be out of control with my legs going in every direction. I remember flying down the mountain with no clue or how clue how or what was going to slow me down. I think I remember the faceplant option as my safest bet. At least I would break my leg. I wouldn't break my legs. I had snow go up my nostrils and up in my jacket and down my pants. And after more than 3 hours of this punishment, a snowboard finally became available. The rental attendant informed me that the snowboard should be at least 4 foot 6 inches long because of my height. But this board was a little shorter than that. Still, he said, "You should be fine." Then off I went to the lift chair. And as I sat down on the wooden seat, the question entered in my mind, how would I get off the lift chair? I watched the guys in front of me and said to myself, I can do that. When my turn came, I experienced my second faceplant of the day. I was off to a great start. A bunch of people became irate while sitting and waiting for their turn to get off the lift. I lifted myself up and moved myself out of the way and strapped the board to my feet. I pointed the board downhill, and to my amazement, I didn't fall. It took me only seconds to realize it was all edge control. I used the edges to keep the board under my feet and also to keep myself from gaining too much speed. When you were first learning to snowboard, if you gain too much speed, you could blow out an edge and hop 4 feet down the mountain before you regain an edge on the slope. Snowboarding is, as John described it, surfing on a really long wave. Only this wave is frozen, and unless you have an avalanche of snow chasing you down the mountain, there was no long hold down like under a wave's white water. Up until this point in my life, surfing was the only thing that I was naturally good at. Now I was surfing the mountain. Within an hour of strapping on a snowboard, I was flying down the expert slopes. This mountain stayed open until midnight, so I would usually keep riding until my body was exhausted. It was great riding after dark because the lift lines thinned out so much that I could ride a slope, pull right up to the lift again, and jump right back on without any lines. I got to the point where I would buckle up on my binding while still on the lift chair. So when I got to the top, I would just jump off and fly down the mountain without having to stop and buckle up. The East Coast usually sprayed fake snow at night because that was the only time it was cold enough to blow the snow. And many times I would ride right through the spray, and when I come into the lodge, I would have several inches of ice hanging off my face mask. We explored all the ski slopes or ski resorts on the East Coast. The mountains were just not tall enough, and the trails were just not wide enough. I wanted more. I wanted to go steeper, and I had never ridden in fresh powder yet. I loved the waves on the East Coast, but it was a desire to ride longer, wider, and steeper ski trails that moved me farther west. As soon as we settled back into Houston, I ventured down to Galveston to go surf. It wasn't long before I started making fellow surfer friends, and Texas surfers are like no other surfers. For the most part, they all just like to see another face in the water. Many afternoons I drove down to the flagship hotel, which is now the Pleasure Pier, and that sat on top of a large pier. We would surf next to the pier even after nightfall. The hotel had large floodlights that lit the water just enough to see a wave come from out of the darkness. We had to point our boards toward the shore and be ready to take off in an instant's notice because the wave could only be seen no more than 10 feet away. One evening I was headed to Surfside Beach and something told me to go to Galveston instead. And after checking out all the hot spots, I decided to surf the west side of the flagship. Unknown to us out in the water, a young couple committed suicide that day by driving off the pier. We surfed right on top of them without ever knowing it, and I didn't know about it until I turned on the news when I got home. Needless to say, it gave me the creepies. Jumping out of the text a little bit, I think the time error, the timestamp for this time that I'm talking about is around 1994. Anyway, back to the text. Galveston has a local surfboard shaper named James Fulbright. I met James a couple of times from mutual acquaintances while growing up. He is a laid-back surfer who loves surfing and shaping. And at the time, I was into airbrushing on canvas, so most of my art was surf-inspired. So I showed James my art, and we talked about James's logo designs on his boards. He asked me if I could come up with something new, so I sat down for days airbrushing new designs. I showed him the designs. I showed the designs to my wife, who was a very talented graphics designer, and she put them into Photoshop, and we came up with a couple of designs that James really liked to use on his boards. And to this day, every time I see my logo on his boards, I feel like a part of me is in his surfboards. Our first Western, or should I say Midwestern resort was Ski Santa Fe, New Mexico. I was amazed at how wide the trails were there, and they were twice as long as any of the trails that we encountered on the East Coast. And I'm talking about snowboarding it, by the way. The drive from Houston to Santa Fe was a whopping 15 hours. And I asked myself why an avid snowboarder and surfer would want to live in Texas. Most people don't know it, but Texas gets 200 storms on average per year. More storms mean more waves, and the cost of living is also less. It was actually much less than living on the East Coast. And we felt that the sacrifice of living in Texas would be worth it. When we lived on the East Coast, the wide open slopes on the West Coast seemed to always be out of our reach. We used to watch snowboarding videos of guys making long drives to the slopes, and we wondered why they got a little stir crazy in the videos, but then we found out 15 hours is a long time to be in a car. After a couple years of visiting Santa Fe, we were ready to try Breckenridge, Colorado. A week before our first drive to Breckenridge, I was watching the news, and I learned that several people died on the roadside because of the roads were closed. They were closed ahead of them, and they were closed behind them. So these people were stuck out on the open road, deep in snow. And when the people ran out of gas, they pretty much froze to death. And this news fresh in my mind as we drove up through the northern New Mexico border. The weather at lower altitudes was fine, but then all hell broke loose as we reached the mountain pass. The snow started, and as we drove on it, there was a complete whiteout. And I knew if we stopped there, we would be in serious trouble. At the time, my wife was driving, and I told her, no matter how slow you go, don't stop. Just keep driving. Our lives were at stake, and we were scared. But after an hour of driving about 10 miles an hour, we finally came down out of the pass. And the farther we drove north into Colorado, the heavier the snowfall became. Just across the Colorado border, they started closing the roads again, and we pulled into a little town and stopped at the first hotel we could find. Realizing how lucky we were to get a room, we settled down, tired from a long drive, but wondered if we would ever be able to make it to Breckenridge. We awoke the next morning and opened the hotel door only to realize that we were snowed in with over 4 or 5 feet of snow, fresh powder. Eager to know what fresh powder was like that deep, it felt like we had grabbed our boards and climbed up to the hillsides around the hotel. And then I noticed some cliffs that looked like fun along the roadside too. So off I went, climbing up to the top of some cliffs that had like 10-foot drops in them. And this would be my first cliff drop, so I was a little scared that if I messed up, I'd be on the road tasting asphalt. I strapped on my board and inched up to the ledge, and I looked down. I took a deep breath and launched. I landed in waist-deep snowbank. It was like landing in a bed full of pillows. I did this over and over again until I flattened out all of the landing areas. It was so much fun. After my first jump, I noticed that they reopened the roads, and we were full of anticipation and excitement to get up to Breckenridge. Our dreams were finally becoming true. We loaded up the Jeep and kept heading north, thinking it would be cheaper and more of an adventure. I decided we would stay in this little town 20 miles south of Breckenridge called Fairplay. And it was weird how we seemed to be drawn right to this bed and breakfast hotel, kind of hidden in the back of Fairplay. I told my wife to turn right here and then take a left there, and on the right-hand side of the road in the back of Fairplay was an old hotel called the Hand Hotel. I thought it was a little funny that the hotel was empty, with a sign on the door about how to reach the caretaker. We checked in and grabbed some food and cooked it in the kitchen. Maria was my wife at the time. Maria and I were the only ones in the hotel. We had our choice of any room, and we wanted not even the caretaker, of any room that we wanted, and not even the caretaker would stay in the place. As we tried to go to sleep, we heard a constant knocking on an outside wall. Not thinking too much about it, we went to sleep and only to be awakened time after time by this knocking. We found out the next day while having breakfast in Breckenridge that the Hand Hotel was a famous haunted hotel. I looked at the wall where the knocking was coming from, and there were no plumbing pipes in this wall. It was an exterior wall, and there was nothing that could create any knocking. This only happened the first night. The next night's sleep was difficult, but all I could think about was being visited again. Breckenridge was everything we hoped it would be. You could ride for 3 days if you wanted and never hit the same slope twice. I rode every black and double black slope that I could get to. I was in shortboarder snow heaven. On the third day, I wanted to ride my first bowl. Off I went. First to the chair, then to a T-bar, and at the T-bar, you had to climb up the bowl pretty much 10 feet at a time. Like I said, the T-bar gets you pretty much to the bottom of the bowl. You still have to climb all the way up the bowl's edge. From here, you had to huff it up. I was in great shape, but I could only climb about 10 feet at a time. I still had about 100 feet ahead of me. Along the path, I saw signs that warning that if you get hurt, it would be a long time before the ski patrol could get to you. This sure made me think. I thought, do I really want to do this? Am I good enough to tackle this? This is really steep. One funny thing I noticed on the way up was this young fellow carrying those short 2-foot-long skis. And this guy passed me running up the bowl, sliding down, and then come up and pass me again a second time. I think he passed me up 3 times before I finally made it up to the top of the bowl. Once I made it to the top, I was amazed by the view. It took me a total of 4 hours to get to the top of the bowl, but it was worth all the hard work. Looking toward the west, all I could see was mountaintop after mountaintop. It was a view that one has to experience at least one time in their life. It's the most amazing thing. Something only a few brave souls get to see. I was in awe. This directed my attention away from how dangerous the drop of the bowl was going to be. Nonetheless, I buckled up, pulled to the ledge, said my prayers, and launched the snowboard. As I hit my first turn, it was icy and very steep. Adjusting to the conditions, I slowed down my board by taking 50 feet at a time. On my last 50 feet, I let loose as I was flying down into the tree line. The snow got softer and the more manageable. I spent over half a day just for one ride, but to me it was worth it. At that point, that was the fastest I had ever ridden. All of this led up to our last day on the slopes in Breckenridge, and the moment that changed my life was different. After riding for 4 days, I was so full of amazement, love, and appreciation. I rode to the top of a double black diamond run, and when I reached to the top, I looked around and I thanked the Lord for giving me this experience. And as I prayed to God, I said, "Hey God, why don't you ride this one? You use my body and ride this one." So then I strapped on my board, I took a deep breath, and then it happened. I felt this force take over my body, and all fear disappeared. I watched as God took over my body and soul. I rode faster than I had ever dared. I hit 15-foot jumps and flew through the air 30 feet above the snow. I was flying so fast that my hat came off, and I stuck the landing and rode all the way down to the trail's end, all the way to the lodge. I thought to myself, what just happened? What just happened to me? I closed my eyes and said, "God, you're pretty good. I think I'll let you use my body some more." I started wondering if this could be done, or if this could be one of the reasons why we were put on this earth, so God could experience and enjoy his creations. With surfing, I felt a little selfish. Why didn't I have this epiphany out in the water? I didn't understand. A month later, we went to ski Santa Fe, and remembering my experience with God, I strapped on my snowboard and said, "God, your turn." I turned my board down the mountain and took off. Only this time I slammed down on the snow and my face first, and I got snow up in my nostrils 20 feet from my takeoff location. I was confused. I sat there for a minute, wondering what was different. Did God not feel like writing this time? I did not feel God's presence that time. It was all me. I sat there for a minute, wondering what was different. Did God not feel like writing this time? I did not feel God's presence that time. It was all me. The feeling was of no fear was not there. The divine presence was there as my face hit the surface. And pretty much that ends chapter 1. But I wanted to add that that experience was my first experience of Zen, of understanding what real Zen is. And that is the fact that God himself doesn't like to repeat anything in life. Everything is fresh and new with God. And the experience of trying to repeat Breckenridge's experience of flying down the mountain with God taking control, I could not replicate. I had to learn that you could never do the same thing twice. And I'd also like to say that's the way God is with us human beings. He never makes the same human being twice. Everybody is different. Everybody is fresh, and everybody is always new. And that's God's beauty, and that's the world's beauty. Well, thank you again for joining me. We'll pick up with chapter 2 on the next reading. My name is Douglas Grummins, and this is 10,000 Waves. Thank you for joining us. Bye.